Okay, so this is a quick review of exponents and what they mean and how you deal with them. So with exponents, there's some terminology that you need to know. So exponent is really just repeated multiplication. So you can write powers as a repeated multiplication. You can write things in what's called exponential form. And then within exponential form, you have a base and you have an exponent. So we're going to look at some of these words down here in the box and figure out which one's which. So the first thing that sometimes people get confused, actually, if we'll look at this bottom one, it's really easy to know that 10 is the base. Whoops, we'll undo that. So most people realize that 10 is the base, and the base is what gets repeated over and over again. And then most people realize that 6 is the exponent, and that's how many times the base gets repeated. The part that sometimes is confusing is the whole thing is called the power. Sometimes people will say this as 10 to the power of 6, but technically that's wrong. It's actually 10 to the exponent of 6, and the entire thing is called the power. So now that we know that, if we go back to the top, then that must mean that 10 to the 6 is called the power. It is also called exponential form. So that's not one of the options, but 10 to the 6, this word here, exponential form, is also what 10 to the 6 would be. Repeated multiplication is when it's written out with 10 times 10 times 10 6 times. And then the answer, what that equals, is called standard form. So standard form is really just a fancy word for what does it equal. So here, for example, when you're asked to express as a power, you just have to count how many times is that 2 repeated. It's repeated 5 times, and the base will be 2, so that will be 2 to the exponent of 5. When it says write 625 as a power of 5, that means the base is 5. What does the exponent have to be? And that might require a little bit of guessing and checking on your calculator. So for example, 5 squared is 25. 5 cubed would be 25 times 5, which is 125. 5 to the 4 would be 125 times 5, which is going to be 625. So that will be 5 to the 4. And then evaluate 2 to the 7. That just means figure out what 2 to the exponent of 7 is. And on your calculator, there's a few different buttons for exponents. Some of you might have a button that looks like that, and you'd punch 2 and then that button and then your 7. Some of you might have a button that looks like this or this. And so you'd punch 2 and then this button and then 7. So you're going to have to play around with your calculator and see if you can find your exponent button. If you can't, just bring me your calculator and I'll show you where the button is. It's quite easy to do once you know where the button is. So 2 to the 7 means 2 times 2 times 2 repeated 7 times. And that would be 128. So if we just continue on, you looked at prime factorization last year. So figuring out how to break down a number into smaller numbers. And we're going to do the exact same thing you did last year, but then we're going to add one thing new where we're going to actually write the answer in exponential form. So all you have to do to start is think about two numbers that multiply to give you 144. And everybody that does this might have a different looking factor tree at first. In the end though, your answer will always be the same. So it doesn't matter if you did 2 times 72 or you did 12 times 12. In the end, you're going to get the same answer. So I'm going to do 12 times 12. And then you keep breaking those down until you're only left with prime factors. And then if you want, you can bring down your prime factors all to the same level. And that is what 144 is going to be equal to. It'll be equal to 3 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 2 times 2. What you can now do, so a little bit different than last year, something new for grade 7, is to write that in exponential form. So count up, how many times do we see a 3? I see a 3 twice. How many times do you see a 2? I see 4 2's. So now I can write 144 is equal to 3 to the exponent of 2, because there were 2 of them, times 2 to the exponent of 4. And that is going to be the answer that we're looking for in grade 7. So let's do the same with 250. So think of two numbers that multiply to give you 250. I'm going to do 25 times 100. Sorry, 25 times 10. You might choose something different, and that's okay. And then we'll break down each number until we're left with only prime factors. And that would be our final answer. But now we're going to go a step further, and we're going to do it in exponential form. So I have 1, 2, and I have 3 5s. So I'm going to write that as 2 to the 1. Whoops, I wanted that black. So I'm going to write that as 2 to the 1, or just 2, times 5 to the 3. And that would be, so this is my final answer for 250, and this is my final answer for 144.